I came home early, maybe my biggest blunder, or perhaps my lucky break, depending on how you see it. I'd been off the radar for 3 weeks, trekking through the rugged Bitterroot Mountains with my uncle, hunting elk with nothing but sky, pine, and blissful silence. No phone, no updates, just mountain. As I veered off the highway onto the dusty road leading to my ranch, I braced for the sight of my weathered mailbox and maybe a few tire tracks from my ranch hand Ricky. Instead, I was greeted by a velvet rope, a valet stand, and a parade of sleek SUVs lining the path like some fancy real estate gala had hijacked my land. My first thought, did I miss a turn? My second, I'm going to strangle Ricky, though it wasn't his fault. Crawling up the drive, I spotted white event tents peppering my pasture, a stage perched on my ranch house deck, and folks in designer sunglasses sipping champagne under parasols, acting like they were at a Napa wine auction. A banner fluttered lazily in the warm breeze. Echo HOA Community Enhancement Project Auction. Auction? Front and center, in a bold red blazer and black slacks, stood Delilah Cross, my HOA nemesis and personal headache, unseen for nearly 2 months. With a microphone in one hand and a property map in the other, she proclaimed with dramatic flair, "Lot 14, her syrupy southern drawl dripping with smugness. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with the HOA. We will narrate your story on our channel. Includes a naturally spring-fed pond, ideal for ecotourism potential, starting at 50,000. Do I hear 55? That's when I parked the truck right on the lawn, stepped out and yelled, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Every head turned. The music cut off like someone had slammed a door. Delilah froze mid-bid, blinking slowly at me like I was a hallucination. "Oh," she said, sweetly. Too sweetly. "You're back early?" I took a step toward the stage. "You're auctioning off my ranch? That's what you're doing on my porch while I was gone." Delilah gestured casually to 2 beefy men wearing black shirts that read, "HOA Security." "Please remove the trespasser," she said, without breaking eye contact with me. "This is a private event and he's not on the guest list." I laughed, actually laughed. "You called me a trespasser on my own land. Delilah, have you finally lost every marble in that curated kitchen of yours?" "Sir, we'll need you to step back behind the perimeter," one of the goons said, walking toward me like I was some drunk wedding crasher. "This is HOA sanctioned territory until further notice." "You want to touch me, son? You better have a badge." "Or a warrant," I warned, dead calm. My hand hovered near my back pocket, not for a weapon, but for my phone. Of course it was dead. Great timing. And just when I thought this circus couldn't get any louder, Delilah whipped out her own phone and dialed 3 digits. "Yes, I'd like to report a trespasser, possibly armed. Yes, he's making threats." She looked right at me with a smile that made my skin crawl. "He's impersonating the property owner. Cops arrived in under 10 minutes, lights blazing." I showed them what ID I had on me, explained the situation, but the officer shook his head. "Sir, without proof of current ownership documentation or a court order, we can't remove them right now. There's a dispute over deed control on file with the local registry." I stared at him. "That's my grandfather's ranch passed to my father, then to me. That's not a dispute. That's inheritance law." The officer looked apologetic. "Sir, I suggest you file an injunction with the county court, but for now, you'll have to vacate the immediate premises." Delilah's smug little nod behind him nearly sent me over the edge. She actually had the gall to wave. So I got back in my truck, drove down the road a ways, parked at a turnout where I could see the ranch through a line of trees. And I sat and I watched. Because here's what she didn't know. I wasn't just some backwoods rancher with a deer rifle and a loyalty to the land.
I used to be an investigator for the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. I've
Put handcuffs on white-collar CEOs, audited billion-dollar tax fraud rings, and brought down shell companies stretched across 3 continents. And Delilah, she was about to find out just how bad an idea it was to screw with someone who knew how to play the long game. I let the engine cool while I stared through binoculars, noting the names of everyone who walked into that tent.
every bidder, every HOA member, and most importantly, what documents were being signed on that table under the maple tree. She was forging something. I could smell it, and I was going to burn every last one of them with the truth, not just because.
They tried to steal from me, but because they were arrogant enough to do it in broad daylight. Now tell me, what would you do if you came home and found your life being auctioned off? Let me know where you're watching from. I have a feeling this story might hit closer to home than you think. Some battles don't start with bullets or fists. Some start with paper, quiet, dense, stamped in triplicate. Delilah Cross knew that. She'd made a career off of it. But what she didn't know was that I'd built a career tearing that kind of paper apart, line by line, until it screamed fraud in plain English. The Cross and Granger families had been at odds for decades. My father, Everett. Granger had once owned nearly 200 acres in this region, most of it passed down from his grandfather. Delilah's father, Thomas Cross, tried to run a shady real estate firm in the 1970s that went belly up after he mistakenly sold the same plot of land to 3 different parties. Guess who exposed him? Yep, my dad. It was a scandal that made county headlines and turned family barbecues into small-town legends. Delilah never got over it. Her father died under investigation. Her mother moved away in shame, and she spent the rest of her adult life trying to claw her name back into something respectable. Becoming HOA president of our local community gave her just enough power to pretend she'd done it. What I hadn't realized was just how far she was willing to go to get revenge. The first real sign something was off came when I stopped by the county recorder's office to pull my latest deed copy. I didn't trust digital access anymore, not after what I saw at the auction. The clerk, a kid named Danny, who'd interned with the sheriff's office the summer prior, gave me a strange look. "You're here to challenge the update?" he asked. I frowned. "What update?" He shifted uncomfortably, glanced at the screen, then leaned in. There was a transfer of trust filed last week. Looks like a third-party trust company was assigned temporary
Stewardship due to abandonment. My stomach dropped. Abandonment? I was gone 21 days. That's not abandonment. Danny nodded. I know, but someone filed a form. HOA stamp on it.
claimed property neglect, no active utilities, and no notification of intent to return. I felt my blood rise. Delilah had used an HOA provision buried in their bylaws to classify unattended properties as inactive stewardship zones. That led her petition for administrative oversight under a protective clause that in theory prevented vacant land from becoming a blight risk. It was supposed to be used for truly deserted plots, places where no one had paid taxes or answered mail in over
A year.
She twisted it to fit a 21-day absence. But she didn't stop there. Back home, I combed through every HOA communication from the past 6 months. There were memos I'd never received, notices I never signed, votes I never cast. One dated from 2 months back claimed that I had granted conditional proxy authorization for DC Heritage Group to act in my stead for financial stewardship.
I never signed anything like that. And then it hit me. Someone had forged my signature badly. Sloppy loops, the wrong date format, and a middle initial I hadn't used since college. It was amateur hour fraud. But in bureaucracy, even amateurs
Could cause a hell of a lot of damage. I called Amanda. Her voice came through, clipped but steady. "That's enough for a preliminary inquiry," she said. "You sure you didn't authorize anything? Email, phone, carrier pigeon?" "Not a damn thing," I said.
"And it's personal. You remember Delilah Cross?" There was a pause.
"The one your dad dragged into court back in the 90s. I exhaled. "Her? She's back. She's in charge, and she wants this ranch." Amanda didn't ask why. She knew the Cross family history as well as anyone. "Okay," she said, "let me talk to some people. At the clerk's office, you focus on gathering anything they've published or distributed with your name on it." I hung up and got to work. I started with the obvious, the HOA website. It was cleaner than I remembered, probably Knox's influence. He was their attorney of record now, a former city councilman who treated ethics like an optional condiment. There, under current community development initiatives, was a PDF titled Granger Ranch Parcelization Overview. They had color-coded maps, sales timelines, and placeholder investment partners already listed. My land was labeled as Phase 1 of the preserve at Delilah Ridge. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. The arrogance was almost admirable. A deeper dig found 3 invoices, each stamped as paid, from local surveyors and property appraisers, all within the last 30 days. One invoice included interior access assessment, which meant someone had gone inside my home while I was away. Legally or not, someone had crossed my threshold. That was it for me. This wasn't just paperwork now. It was trespass, it was criminal intent, and it was time to flip the board. I spent that evening reviewing every surveillance system I'd inherited from my father. One particular camera, hidden in an old bird feeder overlooking the main driveway, had motion logs from the week prior. There they were, 2 men in work shirts marked HOA Security, loading boxes into a black SUV, one of them holding what looked like a laptop case. A second clip caught Delilah herself walking the property with a clipboard and a glass of wine, pointing at structures like she was on a real estate tour. She didn't know she was being watched. That was her mistake. But it wasn't just Delilah. A new name kept surfacing in the background of these documents. Knox and Associates, the law firm assisting with the trust filings. I remembered Knox. He'd once tried to rezone an entire neighborhood for a casino project using forged petitions from supposed residents. That one blew up in his face, but he landed soft. Always did. And now he was back wrapping Delilah's schemes in legal silk. My phone buzzed. Amanda again. I ran the signatures through the county's scan database. She said, 2 matches are way off. One of them I'd bet my badge was written by someone left-hand. I laughed dryly. I'm right-handed. Always have been. Amanda exhaled through her teeth. All right, we can open a civil case, maybe more, but this is going to move fast if they think you're prepping charges. Be ready. I told her I was born ready. Truth was, I wasn't sure. This was bigger than I thought. I dealt with corporate crooks, tax evaders, even cartel fronts posing as non-profits, but this was personal. And personal had a way of blinding you if you weren't careful. So I studied myself, reviewed every inch of the property, every document with a forged header, every official HOA vote I supposedly agreed to. Delilah had lit a legal fuse, but she didn't realize how long mine was, and if I played it right, I wouldn't just stop her. I'd make sure she'd never step foot in my pasture again without hearing that quiet tick of consequences trailing behind her heels. Amanda arrived just past 10, headlights slicing through the dark as her rental car crunched over gravel outside the old barn. She didn't bother with small talk. As soon as she stepped inside my living room, she tossed her coat over a chair, grabbed the file I'd printed from the registry site, and started flipping through.
"This is laughably bad," she muttered, holding up the limited power of attorney. "No way this survives a single courtroom glare. Half the language in here isn't even legal." I poured her a coffee and nodded. She's not aiming for legal. She's aiming
For momentum. Amanda raised an eyebrow. Public perception over actual ownership. Smart. Desperate, but smart. We stayed up half the night, building a timeline. My departure, the forced eviction of Ricky, the document filings, and the auction sudden appearance. Amanda flagged 2 names I hadn't noticed. Delilah's business partner on the filing was someone named Gerald Knox, a former associate in a dissolved Nevada land trust who had been investigated but never charged for title fraud in 2017. Delilah had picked her accomplice carefully, but she missed one thing. I knew how to investigate people who thought they were smarter than the law, and I had just enough left in me from my IRS days to put the pressure on where it counted. The next morning, Amanda and I drove into town. Our first stop was the county clerk's office. Amanda flashed her badge and got us into the records room without much fuss. I found the transfer packet Delilah submitted, 63 pages of doctored signatures, half-baked verifications, and a hilariously vague mission statement about environmental reallocation and community enhancement. One line jumped out: property in question deemed inactive and subject to provisional. Administration per HOA jurisdiction, clause 16.7. I turned to Amanda. That clause doesn't exist, she grinned. It will for about another 24 hours until I file fraud with supporting evidence. Then came the bombshell. Tucked into the financial disclosures attached to the filing was a payment trail. Delilah had taken out a private loan for $280,000 collateralized by EC Heritage Holdings, which at the time, according to her documents, already included my ranch. She had leveraged stolen land to get a loan. The recipient bank, an outfit called Mid-South Growth Capital, notorious for backing risky land flips. Amanda whistled low. She's not just trying to steal your land, she's trying to flip it before anyone can stop her. That auction, it's her last-ditch play to make this stick before the loan calls in. At that point, the picture was clear. Delilah needed this auction to work. She needed those sales to go through fast so she could show the bank incoming revenue and avoid default. If we pulled the rug now, everything collapsed. Amanda filed a motion with the county court by noon, seeking an immediate injunction against any further sale or transfer related to my property until ownership could be verified. It would take 48 hours to process, but it was a start. Meanwhile, I headed back to the ranch perimeter with a long lens camera, a charged phone, and a duffel bag full of surveillance gear for my old job.
Motion sensors, audio bugs, you name it. I wasn't just going to stop Delilah, I was going to document every lie, every coercion, and every contract she waved under a buyer's nose. That night, as the party tents lit up again, I crouched near the
old irrigation shed and recorded everything I could. Delilah met with a man in a grey suit, Knox. He handed her a folder, and I caught the tail end of their conversation. If we can't move 3 more lots by Thursday, we're done.
I'm not going down for your family feud. Family feudy. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about money. This was about my father. Delilah wasn't satisfied destroying our legacy with one court case 20 years ago. She wanted the name erased, the land rebranded, the story rewritten.
I sat there under the stars, surrounded by the hum of crickets and distant jazz from her party tent, and I felt something ancient settle into my bones. This wasn't just a legal case anymore. It was personal. It was war. And I had just filed the first missile. Amanda texted at midnight. Judge reviewing injunction will advise by morning. Get some sleep. But I didn't sleep. I watched. I waited. And I made a list of every buyer's license plate that pulled through those gates, because come morning they were going to learn what it felt like to bet on the wrong side of the law. Before heading in, I checked the motion sensors. 2 had been tripped in the last hour. I reviewed the footage. Knox and another man, possibly an investor, walking the outer pasture, pointing at parcels like they were already dividing a pie. One of them actually spit on the dirt, laughing. I saved the clip. The more contempt they showed for what they thought was a done deal, the more satisfying it would be when the bottom dropped out from under them. Around 3 in the morning, I finally went inside and sat in the kitchen, lights off, just listening to the house breathe. The old wood floors creaked like always, the fridge hummed, and out past the window, the porch swing swayed gently in the
wind. My grandfather built that swing with his own hands, stained it with linseed oil, and told my father, "Keep it level, everything else will follow."
At the time I thought he meant balance, but now I think he meant vigilance, because balance doesn't keep people like Delilah from scheming. Vigilance does. So I poured myself a stiff cup of black coffee, opened a fresh notebook, and started writing out the names of everyone who had signed off on the documents, not just Delilah and Knox, the notary, the county clerk who fast-tracked the transfer, the HOA board members who approved the emergency oversight clause. If they wanted a paper war, I was going to bury them in it. By sunrise, I had mounted a new sign on the outer fence line using a hammer, some old wood, and the kind of permanent red paint usually reserved for fire hydrants. It read, "Under federal review, property subject to title fraud investigation." No frills, no fine print, just bold letters on a ranch that refused to be erased. Within hours, I saw the first cars turning around. Then, a second wave slowed down, read the sign, and kept driving. Eliza's morning wine and cheese mixer had an awkward silence about it, like guests trying to pretend they hadn't just shown up to buy stolen goods. I stayed hidden, watching from the tree-line. At one point, Delilah came out and stared at the sign, hands on her hips like a principal who caught someone chewing gum. She pulled out her phone and made a call. I knew exactly who she was calling. An hour later, I got a ping from Amanda. Judge signed, emergency injunction granted, copies being filed now, you've got teeth. That's when I got bold. I sent Delilah a text, first one in 3 years. It said, "Try selling a felony, see how far that gets you." No response. But she stopped smiling on stage after that. By noon, I made my next move. I rented a digital billboard just outside of town for one day. The message read, "Thinking of buying land from the HOA? Better ask who owns it." It was petty. It was glorious. Within hours, local chatter picked up. Amanda fed the story quietly to a journalist friend in the county news who had a long-standing grudge against HOAs. They published a piece titled "Ranch War." Former IRS investigator accuses HOA of land fraud. It wasn't front page, but it was viral enough in our zip code to rattle a few cages. Late that afternoon, a courier dropped off a cease and desist letter at my gate, signed by Delilah's new legal team. Knox, firm, no surprise there. It accused me of defamation, trespassing, unauthorized surveillance, and interfering with lawful business operation. I pinned it to the same signpost as my fraud notice, added a sticky note that read, "Keep the paper, I've got the originals," and went back to work. Because while Delilah was scrambling, I was setting the stage for the final blow. That night, I cleaned up the irrigation shed and set up an old projector system from my IRS days. I had footage from the previous auctions, audio from her conversation with Knox, and a neat little slide deck outlining her loan fraud and forged POA. My plan? A reverse auction, a community event. No tickets, no bidding, just the truth, broadcast, on a giant white canvas for every potential buyer to see. And I'd timed it perfectly because her closing ceremony was scheduled for Friday at 5. Amanda came back out to the ranch just after sunset. You really think a public showdown's the move? She asked. I nodded. She's playing optics. I'm going to hand her the camera and let her hang herself with it. Amanda smiled. Then let's give her an audience. We worked late into the night refining the footage, aligning timestamps, layering voice clips over contract scans. The resulting video wasn't flashy, but it was irrefutable. It was a story told by her own voice, her own pen, and her own greed. No commentary, no interpretation, just the receipts. The next morning, I took a slow ride through town. Stopped at the diner. Got a lot of stares, a few nods. One guy even stood and clapped as I walked by. I'm not one for showboating, but I admit it felt good.
Real good. As I pulled back onto the road, I noticed a handful of those fancy SUV driving investors parked in front of the courthouse. Some were yelling into phones, others just looked pale. Whatever Amanda had filed had made an impression.
That afternoon, I saw a moving van outside Knox's office. Fast work for a guy who claimed nothing could touch him. I spent the rest of the day making backup drives of the video, printing copies of key documents, and laying out laminated folders labeled with each buyer's name. Insurance, in case any of them tried to claim ignorance later when the truth hits, like a freight train. Some people like to pretend they never saw the tracks. I was making sure they couldn't claim that luxury. Around dusk, a couple I'd never seen before drove up in a silver Tesla and asked if they could walk the boundary. We were thinking of making an offer, but now the woman trailed off, looking at the fraud sign. I nodded toward the field. Take a look and ask yourself if it feels like something you can trust. They didn't stay long, didn't need to. Truth has a way of sticking to your boots after you've walked through it. Later that night, I took a walk down to the creek. The stars were out, moon hanging like a spotlight above everything we were about to expose. I skipped a few stones, felt the breeze. This land had been quiet too long, watching, waiting, absorbing, every footstep, every lie, every trespass without protest. But now it had a voice again. And come tomorrow evening, that voice would echo off the barn walls, across every hill, and into every courtroom that would listen said nothing out loud. I didn't have to. The land already knew what I was going to do, and it was ready. Before I turned in for the night, I got a visit I didn't expect. Ricky, my neighbor, the same guy the HOA once fined for having a rooster that crowed past 6 a.m., showed up on his dirt bike. "Heard you're planning something," he said, helmet tucked under one arm. I raised an eyebrow. "Maybe," he grinned. Well, I brought backup. Behind him came 2 more bikes and then a pickup truck full of hay bale. Apparently the whole road had been buzzing. We figured if Delilah gets to host a show, so do you. They started. Unloading, setting up seating, running extension cords. By the time I walked back inside, my barn looked like it was ready for a movie night at the Alamo. Friday arrived like a thunderstorm waiting to break. The sky was heavy, clouds moving low and fast, as if the world knew something dramatic was about to unfold. Delilah's big finale was scheduled for 5 sharp. Flyers had been slipped into every mailbox within 3 miles, promising an unprecedented opportunity to be part of a historic real estate transformation. Her words, not mine. Meanwhile, I had my own plans. Smaller budget, bigger impact. Amanda helped me calibrate the projector against the wide side of the barn. The faded red paint acting as the backdrop for what would become the most satisfying 3 minutes of raw truth the HOA had ever seen. We spliced together audio clips, documents, and video from 2 weeks of surveillance into a rapid-fire highlight reel of Delilah's corruption. No narrator, just the facts, signed, time-stamped, and damning. Around 4, the first guests began arriving at her so-called closing ceremony. This time, it wasn't just wine and finger food. She had a full brass quartet playing near the driveway, tent draped in gold ribbon, and a ridiculous floral arch bearing the words, "Vision to Reality." Knox stood near the stage, checking his watch. Delilah paced, trying to smile through gritted teeth as fewer cars than expected rolled in. Word had spread fast. The billboard, the article, and a dozen whispered phone calls from HOA skeptics had done their job. Then came the real twist. Amanda had quietly issued subpoenas to the notary involved in the forged POA and the Mid-South Growth Capital rep who approved the loan. They were both on site under the guise of attending the auction, but really they were there to observe. And if they witnessed fraud in action, that would be the nail in the coffin. At exactly 5 Delilah took the stage with all the flair of a Vegas magician about to make an elephant disappear. "Welcome, friends, neighbors, visionaries," she began, her voice smooth but thin. "Today marks a new chapter for our community, a chance to build something lasting together." I waited just a few more lines, and as we opened bids for the final lots, that's when the side of my barn lit up like a drive-in movie. The screen flickered to life with Delilah's own voice. "If we can't move 3 more lots by Thursday, we're done. I'm not going down for your family feud." The crowd turned. Some gasped, others began filming. Knox froze mid-step. Delilah's eyes darted toward the barn, then back at the murmuring guests. Next came the visual receipts, her signature traced over and matched against a reel, one from the county office overlaid clearly mismatched. Then the bank loan documents, showing the ranch listed as collateral before she even filed the fake POA. Finally, a clip of her telling HOA members, "It doesn't matter what he thinks. Once we own the narrative, we own the land." The last frame was a freeze of her grinning while shaking hands with Knox under the auction tent. The screen faded to black. Silence, then murmurs, then footsteps. Slow at first, then brisk. People walking to their cars, some shaking their heads, a couple yelling. One woman spat at Knox's shoes before driving off. Delilah stood frozen, her fingers clenched around the microphone. "This was a smear campaign," she barked in a legal ambush. That footage was doctored, but no one was listening anymore. Even the quartet had stopped playing. Amanda stepped forward holding a thick envelope. "Delilah Cross, this is a notice of investigation, issued by the District Attorney's Office. You are advised to retain legal counsel immediately. A copy of the injunction is included along with statements from 2 witnesses who allege you forged their involvement in administrative transfers." Delilah dropped the mic, literally. It hit the stage with a hollow thud. Knox tried to walk away, but one of the county deputies blocked him. "Not yet," the officer said flatly. "You'll want to stick around for a few questions." Delilah's face turned, pale. "You set me up." She hissed at me across the field. I shrugged. "You walked into the frame yourself?" Amanda smirked. "Funny how the truth feels like entrapment when you're guilty." Delilah's shoulders slumped. Her blazer, once stiff and commanding, now hung awkwardly around her like armor stripped of purpose. And just like that, the queen of the HOA found herself with no kingdom, no crowd, and no exit. We stayed behind as the tents came down and the last of the attendees drove off. A light drizzle had started, turning the dusty driveway into a soft, damp trail. Amanda stood beside me, arms crossed, watching the last car leave. "Think she'll fight it in court?" she asked. I shook my head. "She might, but she's done. Even if she wins on some technicality, her reputation's fried." Amanda nodded. "And the land?" I looked out over the pasture, the fading sign still hanging crooked.
On the old post. Still mine always was, just needed reminding. The projector still hummed behind us.
I unplugged it, packed it back into its box, and slung it into the back of my truck. Amanda leaned in, voice low. "That was good TV, by the way." I grinned. "Yeah, maybe someone out there is taking notes." She raised an eyebrow. "See?" I chuckled. "Let's hope not, but if it happens, I've got plenty of tape left." The sky cracked with distant thunder as I shut the tailgate. One storm ended, another waited, but tonight justice had rolled through my ranch like lightning and left nothing standing in its way. As we loaded up, Amanda pointed toward the tree line. "Who's that?" she asked. A lone figure stood just beyond the clearing, tall, hunched slightly, watching. I squinted. It was Harold Drake, one of the former HOA board members who had voted in Bisham's favor of Delilah's proposals. I hadn't seen him since the first board meeting that went south. He didn't wave, didn't move, just turned and disappeared into the woods. Amanda raised a brow. "You think he's next?" I zipped the bag shut and slung it over my shoulder. Maybe. Or maybe he's realizing he backed the wrong horse. I lingered a moment before leaving the barn. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of damp grass and old smoke. I took a deep breath. The kind you take when something that's been pressing down on your chest finally lifts. This wasn't just a win. It was a reckoning. For every person who ever had their mailbox repainted without permission, for every fine over grass length, for every overreach done in the name of community standards, this time the standards had fought back, and we came out.
Standing.
I turned off the lights, shut the barn doors, and let the darkness settle in. It felt earned. The next 72 hours unfolded like a slow-motion implosion. Once the DA's notice was officially filed and the footage submitted into preliminary record, the news spread like wildfire through the county, and not just in whispers. It made the evening segment on local broadcast with a headline that read, "Dear Investigator Takes Down Rogue Board." I couldn't make this stuff up. Reporters started calling.
My landline.
Some of whom had ignored every one of my letters now left long voicemails begging for a second chance or trying distance themselves from Delilah. It was amazing how fast loyalty dried up when subpoenas came knocking. Even the guy who used to find me for not pressure washing my barn facade every spring suddenly remembered he'd always had concerns about Delilah's leadership. But for me, none of that was the win. The wind came quietly in a brown envelope delivered by hand from the county recorder's office. Inside was a letter notarized and sealed, officially affirming that the previous deed transfer had been declared
Void. Retroactively invalid. My name was back on the record, exactly where it had been before this circus tried to rewrite it. The ranch was mine again, legally, indisputably. And if anyone even tried to contest it again, they'd be doing so in
front of a judge who now had about 3 hours of video proof that doing so was hazardous to their career. Amanda and I met that afternoon under the willow by the creek, where I'd tied off the old canoe years ago and forgot it existed. She brought lemonade in a stack of printouts. Mid-South Growth Capital just cut their losses, she said, handing
me the top sheet. They sold the lien back to the county at a markdown, didn't even fight it. Knox resigned from the firm. And Delilah? She trailed off, eyes searching mine. She's taken a deal, I raised an eyebrow. Plea? Amanda nodded.
3 felony counts, deferred sentencing, 8 years probation, no HOA leadership for life, and full restitution of any funds collected during the auction. She'll keep her house but lose her title. probably move. I sat back against the tree and exhaled for what felt like the first real time in weeks. So that's it? Amanda smiled. That's it. Unless you want to sue her? I shook my head. What for? The best revenge is already on tape, she laughed. That's cold even for you? I shrugged. You want to put out a fire? Sometimes you let it burn itself, out first. I could see it in Amanda's eyes. She respected that answer more than she let on. In the days that followed, the HOA held a special meeting, or what was left of it. Half the board had resigned. The other half were suddenly asking how they could transition to a volunteer advisory council. The homeowners, those still living here, voted to dissolve the formal HOA altogether. In its place, a cooperative trust with open books, rotating leadership, and zero ability to touch private land without unanimous consent.
I didn't run for a spot. I didn't need to. Just being there was enough. People finally looked me in the eye again. But there was still one last thing I had to do. One final statement. I walked the eastern fence line just after dawn, the dew clinging.
To my boots, birds chattering like nothing had happened. I reached the old wooden post where my grandfather had nailed a rusted tin sign nearly 60 years ago. It had once read, Granger Ranch, private property. Over the years, the paint had faded and peeled until it barely whispered. So I brought a new sign. Same size, same spot, fresh wood, clean lettering. It read, This land never needed auctioneers, just caretakers. I stood there for a while, long after. I'd hammered the last nail, staring at it like it might answer back. Maybe it did. Maybe silence is its own kind of applause. Amanda came by around noon to say goodbye. Her case file was closed. She had other counties to serve, other fires to fight. But before she left, she handed me a sealed envelope. You might want to hang on to this, she said. It's a formal copy of the investigative report just in case anyone ever forgets. I tucked it away in my desk under the documents my father once left me. Legacy wrapped in paper, evidence wrapped in truth. Later that week, I opened the gates and let the town in. Not for an auction, not for a press conference, just a gathering. A few neighbors came by with folding chairs and pies. Kids ran through the fields. Someone brought a guitar, no speeches, no rules, just people on land that was no longer contested the way it should have always been. And somewhere in the back of the crowd, I thought I saw Ricky grinning like he knew the punchline before the joke finished. I didn't record that day, didn't need to. It wasn't for the public, it was for us, for me, for every fence line that holds not just dirt, but memory. I guess I always knew Delilah's kind would show up eventually. Someone who thought ownership could be forged, earned through manipulation instead of meaning. But what she forgot was that land remembers. It remembers who walks it, who bleeds into it, who defends it, not for profit, but for purpose. And when it came time to choose, this land chose me. Not because I was the loudest voice or the flashiest bidder, but because I never left. Even when I was gone, I never left. And now I've got work to do. Fences to mend, trails to reopen, maybe even a few old irrigation lines to replace. But that's the good kind of work, the kind that doesn't ask you to fight, just to show up. So if you're
Listening, wherever you're from, remember this.
when the HOA tries to put their hands on what your family built, don't just argue, don't just beg, make them prove it. Because sometimes the best way to defend your home is to turn on the lights and let everyone see what they tried to do in the dark. It took a few weeks for the dust to fully settle. The headlines faded, the reporters moved on, and even the nosy neighbors found quieter drama elsewhere. The ranch was still, almost reverent, as if the land itself had paused to take a deep breath. But the work never stopped. I started each day before sunrise, same as I had since I was a kid. Boots crunching over gravel, the scent of mesquite hanging
low in the morning fog. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. But there's something grounding about routine when the rest of the world just spent a month trying to rip the ground out from under you. I fixed gates, I hauled lumber, I fed livestock.
that barely noticed the chaos swirling around them a week prior. And every so often I'd get a visitor, a neighbor with a question, a pie, a handshake. Some came just to say sorry, most came to say thank you. A man named Walter, who'd lived 2 blocks over for 20 years and never said a word to me, walked up my driveway one afternoon with a 6-pack of root beer and a printout of the HOA's old bylaws. "I never liked how they did things," he said, scratching his neck. "Didn't have the nerve to speak up, but watching you? Well, I figured I owe you a drink and a copy of the rule book they kept under wraps." I thanked him, and we sat on the porch, in silence for a while, sipping something that tasted more like dignity than soda. He wasn't alone. One by one, people stopped treating me like a loner and started treating me like a pillar. Not because I asked them to, because I stood my ground. Amanda called one evening from a town 2 counties over. She just wrapped another
Zoning fraud case. Smaller stakes, but same flavor. She said, you could have gone into politics after this.
"People love a good crusader." I laughed. "Only thing worse than a corrupt board is an honest politician." "I'll pass," she chuckled. "You sure? The badge looks good on you." I leaned back in my porch chair, watching the stars blink to life. "I've got my badge. It's nailed to a post on the east side of the property." Amanda paused. "That sign." I saw the photo. "Damn poetic, Miles," I smiled. "Sometimes words hit harder when you carve them into wood." We talked a bit longer about nothing. Mostly just 2 people who'd walked through fire and came out clean. Ricky came back too. One afternoon, I spotted him near the tool shed, stacking hay like he'd never left. "Thought I'd find my way back before you hired someone with softer hands," he said. I didn't ask where he'd been or why he didn't call during the madness. I just handed him a water bottle and said, "Glad you're back." Because that's the thing about people who know your land by heart. They don't need explanations. They just need the gate left open. All crept in slow that year. The mornings colder, the days shorter. I planted a few new pines along the edge of the west pasture, ones my grandfather never got around to. I figured the next generation should have some shade when they take over, because eventually someone will. Maybe a nephew, maybe a stranger, who stumbles across this place and feels something tug in their chest. But whoever it is, they'll know this land wasn't taken, it was held, protected, rooted in truth. I didn't write a memoir, didn't start a blog, didn't sell the footage, though a producer did call once trying to pitch it as a docu-series called The Ranch War. I told him, "No, this wasn't entertainment. This was home. You don't sell home." What I did do was start a small fund, quiet, local, barely advertised, just a few thousand to start. I called it Defend Your Dirt. It's there for people who get blindsided by bylaws and signatures they never see. For the ones who don't have an Amanda on speed dial, no PR, no board, just help. Because if this could happen to me, an Exirus agent with 20 years of legal experience, it could happen to anyone. There's a quote I read once, carved into a courthouse wall in Dallas. It said, "Justice is truth in action." I never really understood it until I watched Delilah crumble under the weight of her own lies. She didn't lose because she got caught. She lost because she forgot that when you build something on fiction, you better hope nobody checks the footnotes. Me, I keep my footnotes in a fireproof safe and a steel spine under my denim shirt. That's how we do it out here. Quietly, patiently, But when we stand like the land, solid, unmoved, and ready for whatever comes next. A week before Thanksgiving, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a note. You won. But you didn't need to embarrass me. It was signed just a D. No threats, no apologies, just bitterness folded into cursive. I didn't reply. I burned it in the wood stove and let the ashes settle among last winter's embers. Sometimes justice means no further conversation, just closure. So, if you're out there listening to this from a small town, a quiet county, a place where no one thinks drama can knock twice, know this. You don't need to yell to make noise, you just need to shine a light. And if someone ever comes after what's yours, don't flinch, don't fold, get your paperwork, call your people, and dig your damn heels in, because there's something sacred about a line in the dirt. And some lines, they don't move,